Welcome to my new series, the A to Z of Maya. For the first video, we're starting with A is for AOVs. I'm going to talk quickly about what AOVs are and why they're useful, and then I'm going to jump in to show you two ways in which I use them. One as a 3D artist inside of Maya to help me with my render settings, and the second is how to output them so that we can give them to a compositor to then use as part of the compositing workflow. AOV stands for Arbitrary Output Variable, and it has its very own tab in our render settings. I'm using Arnold to render, but every render engine will be able to output AOVs, and it's a way to separate out the different components that make up a beauty pass, giving us more control in compositing without having to re-render. You can also export some utility AOVs, like this is a Z depth pass, which allows you to add things like fog or depth of field in post without having to add to your render time. So one tip for using them as a 3D artist, as a tool to help you, is to help you determine what your render settings should be. If you take the different elements of your render settings, output them as AOVs, you can then look through them and determine where the noise is when you're rendering so that you can add samples where the noise actually is rather than just brute force adding samples everywhere. And if I look, my subsurface scattering is really noisy, so I'm going to have to add some more samples to that as well. And then I can re-render, check what the difference is, and then maybe see if I need to add any more to any specific area. But there's no point adding samples where they're not needed if that's not producing the noise. So how do we actually see the AOVs? We need to add them in our render settings by going to the AOV tab, and then we can select one of the available AOVs and move it over into the active AOV. You can do them individually, or you could come in and select multiple at a time and move them over. You'll notice when they're added to the active AOVs, they then become part of this list down here. This gives you a bit more detail about them. It also allows you to keep them in the active and turn off the render with that checkbox. As for the data driver and filter, I would just leave them as they are. So once they're added to the active AOVs and they are checked, when you hit render inside the Arnold render view, you will notice that once Maya starts to render, you will see a drop down here of the AOVs that you have output. So my Z looks like there's nothing in it, but that's just because I need to bring the exposure down to see it. And then reset that and go back to the diffuse direct. And you can see it's rendering them at the same time as it's rendering the beauty pass. And the great thing about them is they don't actually add to the render time. So in this scene, I have added all of the active AOVs that I typically add, and it added 8 seconds to my render time to have these AOVs. Arnold already has that information and it's just extracting it into the individual images. So my top tip with them is if you add the AOVs and render out and then you decide you want another AOV, you're going to have to re-render. So it's important to ask the compositors which ones they want. They will tell you exactly and then you can just add them. But if you are new to AOVs, then these are the ones, and I will list them on the screen, that I recommend outputting as a minimum. And then what you can do is with your Z and Crypto, they are your utility ones to help you in the compositing software. And then the rest of these ones, you would just take each AOV and add them together in your compositing software, and you can rebuild your beauty pass and then have the control of editing it at a later date without having to re-render. There's one more thing before we can save this. So we would go to the Common tab. We want to make sure we're using EXR, and we also want to ensure that this Merge AOVs box is checked. You don't have to check this, but if you have it unchecked and you have 10 AOVs, when you render a frame, Maya is going to render 1 EXR for the beauty and then 1 EXR per AOV. So you're going to end up with a lot of files to handle. Whereas if you merge the AOVs, it's going to save out 1 EXR per frame. It's going to include your beauty and all your AOVs, and then you can just go into your compositing software and extract the AOVs out. And then you can do your batch render or your render sequence, and it will render the EXRs with the AOVs included. And that is how we output the AOVs. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below and tell me what you want to see for the letter B.